Welcome everyone to one of our first webinars that we've done for Suricata OISF. In this webinar, we'll be together maybe about an hour, probably about 45 minutes of discussion, a little bit of time at the end to ask some questions. I'll do my best to answer those. And I'll, of course, provide some contact info if you want to follow up. What we're going to talk through today is how to set up Suricata with Cuckoo. So a little bit about me. You can see I've got my video on. I am also here in the picture, one that I've used over and over again. I am the Director of Training and Academic Outreach, just outreach in general for OISF. OISF is the foundation that runs Suricata. So anything from working with academic institutions to getting out and providing these webinars and doing trainings. That's really my focus here. So if you have any ideas or any questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can see my contact information. That is a good email, so please use that as well if you have any questions after the webinar that pertains to anything that we discussed, because you'll probably find that I've gone through this enough times in prepping that all of it's very fresh in my memory. So there might be some steps that I've just gotten so used to doing that I forget. Outside of my time with OISF, I work for Bromium HP as a threat researcher. I do some work with Pluralsight, a part of the Air National Guard, and also teach at a university. So a few announcements for everyone. We are trialing Discourse for a new community platform, a place for the community to get together and to interact. So if you're interested in learning more or getting more involved with the Suricata community, please check that out, forum.suricata.io. Of course, this year we are doing very limited on-site trainings. We had on our schedule I think some pretty big events, a couple of black hat trainings that are still pending, but we'll see how things unravel here with COVID. But we're gonna, continue to expand our virtual offerings. We'll do more workshops. We're getting ready to start offering our normal full training courses in a virtual format as well. And we're definitely going to be continuing to do these webinars. We'll use places like the forum in order to make those announcements. So that'd be a great place to find out about that if you enjoy what we did today. You can follow us on social media. I say social media, we're most active on Twitter. So that would be the place to go as well if you want to. We oftentimes cross-post there as well. So I want to get right into the demonstration today, and I wanted to just lay kind of the ground rules for what we're going to be covering. As you can see, we're going to begin with what I'm calling a stock setup of Cuckoo 2.0.7. So that's the latest version that's available on their GitHub. I've gone through the installation as per the documentation, and I'll just point out a couple of things here once we get into the VM. But that's not really the focus here. The focus is on getting into running Suricata. I'm using the latest version of Ubuntu Desktop LTS. That's 1804.4. That was fully updated before I went through any of the installation, and I think the only package I had to install was Clang. Otherwise, I was able to follow the documentation and run it well. I'm actually going to be running on an ESXi host, and so you'll see that everything I'm doing is going to be through the browser. The main user that I created inside of the Cuckoo host is Cuckoo. So that will be the main user, and that will be important to keep track of as we go through some of the setups, because there are a couple of issues that you'll likely encounter that are, probably likely going to be tied to permissions. And so we want to make sure that we're setting things up and running them with the appropriate user, because our Cuckoo user will be our main user to run Cuckoo, to ultimately run Suricata, and then to interact together. As I said, I'll be posting this video on our YouTube channel, so if you need to go back and refer to some of the steps here, that will be available later today or tomorrow or within the next couple of days for sure. So what we're going to cover then is to install Suricata. We're going to get our rules updated using Suricata Update. We'll talk a little bit about how we can manage rules with Suricata Update. One of the last things then that we'll be doing is setting up Suricata to run in UNIX socket mode, which is a significant improvement in terms of our analysis with Cuckoo. We'll see if we can get some real malware to go through. I got a couple of binaries that I grabbed yesterday that were dropping, some office docs that were dropping, I think it was a Zorro. Not sure if those will still be live. They tend to linger for a couple days anyway. So we'll see if we can get those to go through and actually get some alerts. Otherwise, we got some test stuff that we'll use, and then a little bit of Q&A. There are some notes, so if you want to grab the notes, I've already posted that in the chat. but this is the link as well. This is a Google document that just has some of the guides and tutorials I followed, as well as some of the commands that you'll see me run here in just a moment. Okay, I'm going to switch over then. Okay, hopefully what everyone is seeing now is my Ubuntu VM. Okay, so as you can see here, I have the main web page. Of course, I've changed the theme already. My eyes just prefer the darker theme anyway. You can see that my Cuckoo is up and running. I have not put any analysis through, or I had, but I have cleaned Cuckoo so that it's all clean, really a clean slate to go and run. In the background then, I have a couple of tabs or a couple of terminals open. I'm using Terminator and splitting those across. And generally, whenever I set up Cuckoo initially, I like to monitor things and just make sure that all of the the additional processing capabilities, like adding Cuckoo, and that everything's just running fine. This tab right here is for the router. That is going to provide all of the routing inside of our Cuckoo sandboxes for our VMs, our analysis VMs. Excuse me. This is just simply serving the web page, so our primary UI to interact with Cuckoo. This is going to be our main Cuckoo process, and we're going to want to come back and look at this here a couple of times. Hopefully everyone can see the text here fine. I'll make those just a little bit larger. And then this will just be a terminal that I'm going to be interacting with. Now, you'll notice that I have in front of my terminal this parentheses content. This is actually the virtual environment. So I did go through and set up the Python virtual environment in order to run everything. So what you're seeing here is really the recommended way of setting up and installing Cuckoo. And I think then this will also give you probably the best way of setting up Suricata to work with it. If we take a look at the notes, so this is the Google Doc that you'll have access to. You'll see that I'm just referring to some of the initial setup here for getting into and setting up Cuckoo, the Cuckoo docs, and then there's a pretty good blog on hatching.io, which is also the Cuckoo team. And then I found this this posting on Ask Ubuntu that I thought was really good for setting up the virtual environments. Being someone I'm not terribly familiar with running Python virtual environments. If you look at the documentation for Cuckoo, you'll find, again, cuckoo.sh/docs. 2.07 is the most recent version. Probably the biggest thing with going through and getting Cuckoo set up is just making sure that you hit all of the requirements before going into the install. The install is actually quite easy. You can use pip to install if you'd like, so the Python package manager. But making sure that you go through and get all of these, at least all of these that you want. You don't necessarily need to install volatility or guac, but making sure that you go through and get all those requirements installed. That's really probably the biggest thing that you need to go through. Now we'll come back to this terminal throughout our time today. I'm just doing a time check quick. And we'll have to, anytime that we make changes to the Cuckoo configuration, we'll need to stop these processes and then start them again. And that'll get Cuckoo to go ahead and do the reloading of the configuration. So let's see, we can actually just go ahead and do a quick test submission. I like to use, and we'll likely be using testmyids.com because that is guaranteed to generate an IDS alert. Of course, something wouldn't work if I'm trying to demo it. So if that's the case, then typically what I do is take the Windows approach to life and just restart things. There we go. I just have Tor configured right now, so I'm going to be using Tor as the network routing, and I'll set a really short timeout, and then everything else I just leave with the default. I only have one VM configured, so I should be able to just select Analyze. You can submit these through the command line interface as well, but I'm going to probably just do everything graphical here in terms of submitting our tests. Now, if you're not familiar with Test My IDS, you'll see here, hopefully, that once it returns content that includes the user, this ID check, which includes root, and that will generate an IDS alert. Now, I also have Cuckoo running the VMs in GUI mode. You can turn those to be headless. That is, if you're using your whatever virtualization software you're utilizing, you can have it so that your VM doesn't actually launch here. It runs without the GUI. But I like to have that up and running while I'm doing this testing just to make sure everything is working. Now in our main Cuckoo tab, so this is where Cuckoo is running, you can see we got some output, the process that started, it identifies the job and the VM and the task, and then it tells us when the task is complete. And so we're going to want to monitor this a little bit, particularly as we're integrating Suricata, to make sure that if any errors are encountered, any sort of misconfigurations, we see those here. We'll also see now that our task is complete. Oh my. We should have been able to see that job. Not sure what was going on there. There's always a moment of panic when things don't work. We should see this. We should see now. We have, of course, the analysis complete. We can see all the different behaviors and properties that Cuckoo collected. We're focusing on the network. So without Suricata, this is running without Suricata. We can see that we had our request to testmyids.com. It was a GET request. There's the response that was returned. And this is where we're primarily going to see Suricata output in the Cuckoo interface. We have the Suricata option here, and you'll see that there are no Suricata alerts and no Suricata TLS information. So we want to get Suricata installed. Probably the easiest thing to do in terms of getting up and running with the latest stable version of Suricata is to go to the read the docs. Suricata at the time of this recording is 5.0.2, and under the installation, you'll be able to scroll down. In OISF-Suricata, we maintain a PPA. So you'll see that PPA is information on how to add that PPA is here, and then we can install just using apt. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to use a couple of other terminals here in the background for this type of activity. And while that's getting set up, then we'll also get the next command. Oh yeah, it was a piece of cake here. Okay, so after we add the PPA, we need to update. And then we'll go ahead and we'll install Suricata. Okay, this just takes a moment, and then this gets Suricata installed for us. It's not running, it's just installed. So once we get through the installation, probably the easiest thing that you can do just to test that it's working is to issue the Suricata command with a -V. And what you should see here is information about the version, so version 5.0.2. Now, when it comes to Suricata versions, you're going to see that typically it's about once a year that a major version is released, and then throughout the year there are some minor versions. So this, as progress continues to move forward with the development of this engine, and it's very actively maintained and developed. There's new features being added all the time. You're going to see that those older versions start to reach their end of life, and so if you're running on older versions of Suricata, you probably want to consider getting updated or upgraded here fairly soon. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that we're going to run into likely a number of considerations when it comes to permissions. And so it's important to understand some of the key locations, not only for Cuckoo, but then also for Suricata. One of the primaries you'll find is under etc Suricata, we have our suricata.yaml. And this is the primary configuration. And we're going to need to make a couple of changes here a little bit later on. You'll also notice that there is this rules folder, but this is not actually where the rules are installed. And so you'll see that here when we take a look at Suricata update again in just a moment. If we jump into the YAML, if we make any changes, we don't need to make any changes quite yet, so we can just look at this with a regular user. You'll see there are just anything that tells Suricata how to run is in here. One of the most important, probably right off the bat, is right at the top of the configuration. You'll see that we have our different address groups, home net and external net. And what these address groups are used for is in the rules syntax. It really determines how the engine then inspects the traffic. And so we just want to make sure right now that our home net corresponds to the right traffic for our VMs. So if you follow kind of the default setups using VirtualBox, you'll find that VirtualBox uses a 192.168 for its NATed or host only. However you're defining your configuration, it'll be host only. If you follow the Cuckoo setup, then this will be the correct address range. Okay, so now that we have Suricata installed, we need rules. And the preferred way of managing those rules now is through Suricata update. Much like Suricata itself, there is a read the docs available for Suricata update. If you just search for that Suricata-update, you'll get the read the docs. It'll go through. Really, there isn't. If you're installing Suricata, a recent version of Suricata, you'll just get Suricata update with it. So there really is no need to go through the installation. If you don't, though, you might have to then, of course, install it. Now, one of the things that I do want to go through after having installed Suricata is to change the directories and the permissions. And again, this will be important to make sure that all of our worlds here are going to work together harmoniously. So if you scroll down a little bit, or actually if you look right here, you'll see that these are kind of these are the three main directories that we need to worry about. And the Suricata update will need to have access to, especially if we're not going to want to run it as root, which we're not. So we have etc Suricata, which we just went into. That's where we have things like our configuration. We have varlib Suricata rules. And so this is the location that Suricata update is going to write the rules to once it updates those. And then we have varlib Suricata update, which is also in the same sort of ecosystem that is also needed to be writable. So if you run Suricata update, which we're going to do as root user, that'll create these directories for us, but it's going to be owned then by the root user. So we'll need to change those permissions, which that's what the next section down here details. So in order to get Suricata update running, we just need to run sudo Suricata update. Now, when we installed Suricata, it did not have a rule set with it, so it had nothing. So if we didn't do the Suricata update, then we wouldn't have any rules that would ultimately generate the alerts while we're doing our analysis. So you'll see that Suricata update will go out. It'll look at the configured sources. It will go and then pull down the rules from those sources. It will do some, management on those rules before finally testing them with Suricata to make sure that Suricata will run. And then it should say that it's done. And you'll get some information about what happened here, the number of rules and flow bit dependencies and other things, just so you get some, kind of some status about the rules that you're running. As I mentioned, though, we now have, or we should have, those directories. And so I've already created the group Suricata. So I'm just going to go here and make sure that these permissions are set, because what we want to get away from is running Suricata update as the root user. So I don't want to be able to do, I want to be able to do Suricata update without sudo. Okay, and again, if anything fails at this point, then it's likely a permission issue. So we'll have to take a look at that. So hopefully what I can do now is just run Suricata update. And you'll see here we got an error. Failed to create directory varlib Suricata rules. So let's take a look at what might have happened there. Yeah, sure. So let's change the owner. I'm going to do Cuckoo Suricata. And I'm going to go ahead and do that recursively. Remember, Cuckoo is my main user, and we just added the Suricata group. All right, we'll try this again. Fingers crossed that this works. I can only handle so many demo fails in one demo. All right, good. So that looks like we're all set. Now, by default, we don't have any rule sources that are enabled. And so what Suricata update will do is it will go out and grab the emerging threats, the ET open set for us by default. So it recognizes that nothing's been configured, and then it'll go ahead and grab that rule set for us. You can do TAC H, well, if I can get my fingers to work. And that'll give us all of our options in order to interact with Suricata update. So let's go ahead and do, so if we do a list enabled sources, you'll see that it's going to tell us, of course, that there are no enabled sources. So by default, Suricata update comes with a number of kind of pre-configured sources. I just did a Suricata update list sources in order to get those. So you'll see things like ET open is in here. Let me go up a little bit. So you've got your ET open set, and you'll want to take note of the name, because when we add a source, we'll add it by name. There's ET Pro. So some of these are going to require that you have a subscription or provide some sort of a secret code or something, an API key in order to get access. So you can't just simply enable all of them. And most of the sources will tell you that. If we scroll down a little bit, you'll see there is some from the abuse.ch group team there. So some of the SSL blacklists and the J3 fingerprints. So if we want to enable a source, then it's fairly straightforward. Let's just look at the help again to make sure I type the command right. We'll say enable source, and then we'll provide the name of that source. So ET open. So now that should be enabled, and we have at least one source enabled. So when we run Suricata update, we'll be able to see, we'll know that it's pulling down that rules and populating them in the directories that we previously discussed. We'll talk about in a moment adding custom sources. That's also very easy to do. And then once you have your sources configured, you're able to run Suricata update, put it on a cron or something so that it's updating your rules on a regular interval based off of how frequently the rule sets that you're pulling, the sources that you're pulling, are actually updated. Okay, so we've got Suricata installed. We didn't make any changes so far to the Suricata configuration, even though we talked about the location of where we could make those changes. We took a look at Suricata update. We changed the permissions so that we can run Suricata update without using the root user. Now, why that's important is because if you take a look at where those rules are written to, varlib Suricata rules, there's our rules file, and we need to make sure that that's accessible to the Cuckoo user. So we're running Cuckoo in a virtual environment, and if it can't access, or it doesn't have the permissions to access the rules file, then when Suricata goes to load post-analysis, it's going to fail. Okay, the last step in order to get Cuckoo running with Suri is to change the Cuckoo configuration. So you can see I'm going to bounce over to this terminal. I'm already in the virtual environment, and I'm in the default location for where Cuckoo puts not only its working directory, but then also its configuration files. So .cuckoo/conf. From here, you'll see all of the different configurations. And what happens with the way that Suricata is integrated is that Cuckoo will, excuse me, Cuckoo will take So what will happen is Cuckoo will capture traffic using TCP dump. It'll generate a PCAP once the analysis is complete based off of your timeline, and then it feeds that PCAP into Suricata. So it's a processing, it's part of the post-processing that takes place after the analysis is complete. So we want to look at processing.conf, and what we're going to do is just search for the Suricata section. So you see there are actually very few options here that we have to worry about. The biggest one is simply enabling Suricata. So instead of saying no, we say yes. And then if you scroll down, there's just a couple of other settings here. We have where the Suricata binary is located. We have the main configuration, and we have the eve_log. Now, a default setup, as of today, these values can all remain the same. We just saw that the YAML is located in etc Suricata. This is the location of the binary. We could do a which in order to find that if we had any deviations. And this is the eve.json is actually the primary output for the Suricata engine. So that's a JSON formatted file that contains all of the output that Suricata generates. Your TCP, all your flow information, your protocol. So Suricata does protocol parsing, FTP, HTTP, SMB. If it identifies files, if it does file extraction, if it generates alerts, all of that is in eve.json. That means actually that these two items here are actually a bit outdated. They're no longer supported, and they're actually not needed or even utilized because the engine no longer does this files.json or -json.log. You probably will notice when we run Suricata here and when we look at output in Cuckoo that there's going to be a warning message about not being able to find files-json.log, and that's fine because it's not used. Now, if we go down a little bit further, we're going to come back to this in just a few minutes. There is this option to create a socket. And then this will be the last place that we make any changes to our Cuckoo setup when we start running Suricata in socket mode. Okay, so we'll save those changes. We need to then stop Cuckoo and run it again. So again, we're in our virtual environment. We just type in Cuckoo and we'll watch Cuckoo load. Looking for any errors here. And the red always throws me off a little bit. I think, oh no, I've got errors, but that's just information from their news feed right here. As long as it says waiting for analysis task, then that means everything's good. So at this point, what we'll do is we'll go back to Cuckoo, go to the dashboard, and let's just hope I don't have to restart a bunch of stuff here. Testmyids.com again. Well, let's do just a tad longer. Okay, we'll analyze. Okay, so while that runs, we'll just keep an eye on this Cuckoo output, because what we're actually looking for here then is we're going to see Suricata load, and we want to pay attention to any errors. If we had errors in our configuration file for Suricata, this is where we would see it. If we have errors in our Cuckoo configuration, this is where we would see it. And we'll see Suricata load up. We'll see the engine load up. We'll see output here in just a moment. And so if you don't see that, then that means we haven't gotten the configuration right. So there that is. You'll see kind of this is the engine starting, this banner that's telling you the version and the branch that you're on and the mode that it's running in. Also pay attention to how long this takes, because what's happening now is every post-analysis, Cuckoo passes the PCAP to Suricata, but it has to start Suricata process. Suricata has to load the engine. It then has to go through and load all of your rules and get those rules into memory before it can process the PCAP. So as you saw there, that adds 15, 20, 30 seconds. It depends. It depends on the size of the PCAP that it has to process then. The load time, though, depends on a little bit on system performance and how many rules that you have configured. So we're also watching this output here, because again, if there are any errors in our Suricata configuration, this is where those errors would be emitted. So we do want to pay attention to that. Everything looks good. Here's this warning about being able to find the files -json.log, and we don't have to care about that. And now what we should see is our latest analysis. If we go to the network analysis, same information here, but under Suricata, we have now our alerts. So now we have that alert information being generated post-processing from the PCAP that was captured from the analysis. So things are looking pretty good. Okay, if we go back to looking at Suricata update, we can also explore adding additional rules. So abuse.ch, for example, as you saw, these are already added by default to Suricata update. So we don't have to add these as a custom source, but let's just pretend for a moment that we did want to add these as a custom source. And your custom source can be something available online, such as ETOpen or these abuse.ch rules, or they can be something that you host internal. As long as there's a path, a URL to get to those rules, they can be configured as a source. From here, we can select the SSL blacklist. That will open up a new tab. And at the very top of this page, you'll see that there are a couple of different rule sets. There's the SSL certificate set, there's the botnet C2 IP rule set, there's JA3 fingerprint rule set. So there's a number of options for you to choose from. If you're excuse me again. If you're not familiar with some of these rules, we probably don't have time to talk about them today, but they are, some of them are going to be a bit noisier than others. Some of them you might only want to use in a malware analysis environment, like we're setting up here with Cuckoo versus a production deployment in your network. If we wanted to, for example, then grab the JA3, what we can do is, or what will happen is, this will take us to the location of where we can download those rules. So just a straight text file or a compressed file. We can grab either one. We can copy the link, and now we can use that with Suricata Update in order to configure that custom source. So again, we'll go to the options, and it's just simply adding a source. Okay, so the name of the source, and then you'll add the URL and all of that. And we won't necessarily go through that right now. Okay, but if we do want to add, so like I said, this one's already configured by default. Here it is. Now we can use that, and we can add source using the name. So SSLBL/JA3-fingerprints. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I don't add source, I enable source. I'm sure many of you noticed that mistake coming. There we go. And we should see now that we have that is sources enabled. We can list enabled sources just to confirm. There's our two sources. And now if we run Suricata update, we should we should see a change in the number of rules. Error opening file temp. Okay, so this is another issue that you might run into. I'm glad this one came up as well. Again, there's one of the main themes today is permissions. So you can see there's an error opening file, so that's definitely permission, and then it says, of course, permission denied. What happened when we ran sudo suricata update, it created a bunch of temp files, fast.log and some of these others, and it did so as root. And so now it just can't remove those. So let's just go to temp, and you'll see here, I just recognize these files. I've worked with Suricata. Now stats.log, fast.log, eve.json, those are all for sure things we need to get rid of suricata.log. So I'll just remove those. I could probably blast away the whole directory, but I'm a little afraid to do that during a demo. Okay, one more. Suricata.log. Okay, let's see what happens. If I missed one, then we'll just get another error. We'll have to correct that. Okay, so I added the JA3. JA3 is fingerprinting based off of, it's an approach to creating a fingerprint based off of the TLS certificate information. It was developed by Salesforce, and they've got a lot of really good resources available on their GitHub about the approach that they take. Test My IDS does not use TLS, so we're not going to get any additional benefit there. But now we have, again, some additional rules that in a malware analysis environment, I tend to load up on the rules because the more information I can get and the more understanding I can get from the alerts that were generated, I figure that the better off that I am. Okay, we don't need to run through another sample, at least not quite yet. So let's move on to really the last step in what I wanted to cover today. So if we go back to the Suricata Read the Docs, you'll find a section on interacting via a UNIX socket. And what Suricata can do then is it can run in a mode where it actually is listening and interacting through, you can interact with it through a UNIX socket. In the context here of Cuckoo, the biggest benefit that we get is that when we run our analysis, instead of loading our Suricata every time post-processing, then Suricata is already running. The engine's already initialized and the rules have already been parsed. And so all we have to do is feed it a PCAP, and you'll see a very significant increase in performance if we do that. So we need to make some changes though. Let's start down here, and we'll start with the configuration. So we'll go back to our processing. We'll look at the Suricata section. And as you saw a little bit earlier here, we have this line that defines the socket that it's listening to. So I'm just going to comment that out and get rid of that. And what we'll then be looking for, Cuckoo will be looking for, is it'll tell Suricata to look for, or it will look for cuckoo.socket under var run Suricata. So when Cuckoo is done with the analysis, it'll submit the PCAP via the socket rather than starting the engine. How Cuckoo makes this determination is just simply if this is defined, right? And so that's all the configuration that you have to make there. We'll save this we'll save that change to our configuration. We'll need to restart our services. Might as well do that now. So that's the router. This is Cuckoo. And we'll start Cuckoo again. Actually, yeah, let's do that. All right. Now we need to also, excuse me, make a change to the Suricata configuration. All right, so this will be something we have to do elevated suricata.yaml. So the YAML is under etc suricata, and we need to just look for the UNIX command. So you'll notice here, there's a section. It's a bit into the configuration, and it's enabled by default. So that means that that socket's being created as Suricata runs. But what we want to override is the name that's being created. So we need this to coincide with the value that we just configured in Cuckoo. So the default location is var run suricata, and now it should create the cuckoo.socket. Okay, we make that change, so we want to make sure to save that. And now our configuration for suricata is ready. To run suricata in socket mode, I'm going to go back and look at my cheat command to make sure that I type this correctly, and then we'll go we'll go through each step here. So what's going to happen then is we're going to need to run suricata so that it's creating the socket and listening. And so we're just going to run it in a terminal and tie it to this terminal. You certainly could look at running it as a background process or something. We are now running suricata as the sudo, so we are elevating, but we are dropping privileges once initialization is complete. So with this command, the -- user equals Cuckoo. Remember, Cuckoo is our primary user here. This is what's going to drop that. So this will ensure that that socket is created with the permissions of the Cuckoo user. If we forgot this, then it would create the socket with the permissions of the root user, and then our Cuckoo instance would not have access to it. The -c is the configuration. So it's going to look here by default, but you can also define it. -k is none, is looking for checksums. There's a checksum field in the TCP headers that I guess are oftentimes wrong. So this just ignores that. If you don't ignore that, then you get a lot of warnings and it gets kind of annoying. We're going to need to use run mode auto FP, and you can look at the Cuckoo docs if you're not familiar with run modes, and then -- Unix socket. The last argument that I'm providing here is TAC VVV. So Suricata has varying levels of verbosity. I got a friend of mine that we call TAC VVV because he's very, very verbose. And what this is going to do, why I'm doing this, is that once we get Suricata running in socket mode, I want to show you how we can do a live rule set reloading. Right. The benefit of not using socket is that every time Suricata runs, it takes whatever rule files are there, it loads them up. So it's always got the latest version of rules that you've downloaded. With socket mode, you have to tell Suricata to reload the rule set. And fortunately, you can do that through the UNIX socket. So you don't have to shut down the engine and bring it back up. You can tell it to do a live rule reload. And by adding some verbosity to Suricata's output, it's what it's running here, we're going to see that. Let's see. No such file or directory. Okay, I can see what I did. There was a typo. So please note that in the doc. I'll fix it after the webinar, but I forgot the A here when I was copying that command over. Okay, so lots of output here, and what we're looking for is, well, essentially we're looking for, let's jump over here to another terminal. We're waiting for the engine to initialize, and that looks like it's done it. And then we should see our socket. So here's our socket file. Now it's created, and it appears to have the right permissions. So we've made the changes to Cuckoo. Yep, here's an error saying it couldn't find the socket. So now we should be able to run Cuckoo again. Oh, no, Cuckoo didn't. Oh, maybe it was waiting for my password. All right, so now it's started. So I think that the router, Cuckoo won't start without the router. And I think I didn't catch that it was waiting for my password. Okay, so now everything looks to be running. So we've configured Suricata. We got Suricata running in socket mode. We've configured Cuckoo. We're telling it to look for the socket. The last thing is to test. So what we should see, well, I know what we're going to see. Now we're going to see an intentional error, but let's go ahead and give it a try so that I can show you what happens. We'll do a very short timeout. And let's go back to here. So we want to watch the output here in our main Cuckoo window. Okay, so what's going to happen is that there is one last issue that you'll likely encounter when setting this up. You're going to see here in a moment that there's this warning, and it's probably more of an error because what's happening is your PCAP is not being processed, so you've got no Suricata capability. The processing module Suricata returned the following error. It's been configured to run in socket mode, but Suricata SC has not been installed. So Suricata SC is the socket client. And what happens, and I think you're going to run into this issue. I didn't test it not using the virtual environment, but I believe you're going to run into this issue in either setup. So whether you're using those virtual environments or not, is that we need to copy the Suricata SC package from Python into our virtual environment, or if you're not using a virtual environment, into the location that Cuckoo is running. So what we're going to do, it's these three commands. You'll see in the notes this copy Suricata SC into the virtual environment. We need to go to the packages where we are for our packages, our Python packages are for our virtual environment, and then we're going to copy Suricata SC from the location that Suricata is installed in. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll just scooch things around. Well, I know what to do. So this is the location of my virtual environments. Okay, and then we'll do a copy. There we go. Okay, we'll copy that over, and then Suricata. Okay, so that should be it. So that's the workaround. Now, if you look at the Cuckoo Git, there is an issue that actually corresponds to this. It's been marked as resolved. I guess this is one solution for this particular issue. Although I'm not 100% sure the status of it. I know that when I installed this from latest Cuckoo, I installed Suricata after I installed Cuckoo, as you just saw. Maybe that's why it wasn't fixed. But the root cause seems to be that in the virtual environments, that's just that package, that Python package, is not being copied over. Now, in order to test, one way we can do that, so I'm back down here, is we can just go into a Python interpreter and we can try to import Suricata SC. And as long as we don't get any errors, then we should be good to go. Okay, I'm going to go ahead though and stop all of Cuckoo. I'm actually going to deactivate the virtual environment just to make sure that everything takes. Probably not necessary, but I'm kind of an abundance of caution. I'll run the router again. Okay, I'll run Cuckoo again. Okay, so everything is loaded, Cuckoo's ready, and that should be the last change. So fingers crossed. Now when we run something here, okay, and let's watch our Cuckoo output. What we should see is not only does we do not get any errors or warnings, but you should see the performance is considerably faster. Okay, in the meantime, I'm going to get out of. Yeah, see, there we go. So if we look at the terminal here, you see information about the processing. So the output that we saw previously from Cuckoo is now in our terminal here, or the location that we have Cuckoo running, or Suricata running, and you notice that was considerably faster. So take that to scale, and you'll see that it is a very, very massive performance gain. One of the last couple things that we'll look at here as we're approaching the end of our time is how we can interact with Suricata via the socket. So what we can use is the Suricata SC, and then we have to define the socket file. Oh, you know what? I need to give it the full path. So var, classic solution, right? You switch to root. That solves all your problems. Var run Suricata. And there we go. So these are a list of the different commands that you can send to it. The main one that I want to show you is that we can do a rule set reload rules, right? And all that's doing then is not updating your rule set, it's reloading them. So this would be something that you could do after you've used Suricata update. And you'll notice over here then, and again, this is one of the reasons that I'm just running this in a very, very verbose mode, is you'll see that it's updated the rules. So it did that live. There we go. Okay, the last thing that we'll see is if our Zorro doc is still live. So here's a binary. There's a number of ways that you can certainly get access to these if you're more of a researcher. If you're, of course, dealing with these live on your network, then you probably got your own source of problems. But for me, I end up pulling down a lot of these samples from places like abuse.ch and hybrid analysis and others that don't always necessarily require a key. I can show you, I just wanted to show you real quick, I have on my GitHub, and this is also in the notes. Here's a small script that I wrote that works with abuse.ch, and it's a Python script that allows you to tell it to download payloads directly from the abuse.ch server. So it really works in two modes. One is to download the payloads directly from abuse.ch. The other is it'll take the URLs that have been submitted and it will go and then download those directly from those sites, which is maybe a more riskier approach to it. It looks like we are complete, and now we should see if everything worked out. Our latest sample, look at the network analysis. Okay, so moonlitind.com received am25.exe, and that got a 200 response, and sure enough, that host is still live. And if we look at our Suricata alerts, we're going to see that we have a number of alerts now that have been generated. All of these, if you're not familiar with emerging threats, all of these that have been that have the ET prefix are coming from emerging threats. So not only did we see the alert from the download, so that came from the request that we just saw, but then after that download, if we look at the TCP traffic, you'll see that there was some Zorro traffic. So the Trojan itself was executed and it began checking in. It's going to take a moment here to load that, but that's where all those additional, there we go. So here's our check-in from our Zorro binary. And that's where all these additional alerts come from. Now, most of these are hyperlinked. You can see the ID of the alert, the TCP, who it was from, the conversation, so the destination source IPs, the ports, the message, and all of this will link to Moloch. So the next step in setting this up would be to look at installing and configuring Moloch, which we'll probably do in a future webinar. Perfect. Okay, so that was about 50 minutes is what I planned for. That's really all I have for this presentation. So hopefully everyone walks away here knowing how to configure Suricata, how to get it running. There is probably a number of guides out there, but it's relatively straightforward. You install it, you test that it's working, you update your rule set, and then you enable it in Cuckoo. If you want the performance gain of running in socket mode, you've got a couple of extra steps. You have to define the socket with Cuckoo. You have to define the custom socket name in Suricata, and then you have to make sure that that Python library is copied over. But as you can see, it's a couple of just easy copy commands, move commands, and then from there you've got the added gain of running Suricata and socket mode. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to take a look at trying to answer some of these questions. I have one other teammate on, Jason Ish, and he can help. He's one of the core developers and also the core developer of Suricata Update. I'm going to stop the recording, though, to answer the questions, and I'm going to also then provide I'm going to upload this recording to our YouTube channel, which I don't have pulled up here, but if you go to YouTube, you'll find the OISF-Suricata channel. Again, the forums as well, I'll also post information there under announcements. So there was the webinar announcements, and I'll just post a follow-up there for information about where to get to the video. So thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you got a lot out of this. If you have any feedback or any other questions that I can't answer, you have my email and other ways to contact me. Please feel free to do that. And again, I'll do the best I can. I hope everyone's staying safe and making the most out of this really crazy and chaotic situation that we all find ourselves in.